I've worked as a rideshare driver for about 5 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and most nights are uneventful. You pick up strangers, make small talk if they're in the mood, and drop them off. But last summer, something happened during one of my shifts that I still can't explain. It was a Saturday night, just past midnight, and I was driving the usual route through the suburbs. Business had been slow, so I was hoping for 1 or 2 more rides before calling it quits. My phone buzzed with a notification. A pickup request from a location about 2 miles away. The pin dropped near an industrial park, a strange spot, but not unheard of. Maybe someone had car trouble or just finished a late shift. When I arrived, the place was dead quiet. Streetlights cast pale, flickering pools of light over the cracked pavement. A lone vending machine hummed outside a darkened office building. I pulled up to the curb and waited. No one was in sight. After a minute, I tapped the Arrived button on the app and waited some more. The screen showed the rider's name, Jenna. No profile picture. I sent a message through the app. "Hi, I'm here. Let me know if you need help finding the car." No response. I rolled down my window and leaned out, glancing around. "Jenna?" I called out. My voice echoed faintly off the surrounding buildings. Just as I was about to cancel the ride, I saw movement near the vending machine. A woman emerged from the shadows, walking toward the car. She was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. Her hair was pulled back, and she carried a small bag slung over one shoulder. "Are you Jenna?" I asked as she approached. She nodded but didn't say anything. Something about her demeanor struck me as odd. She seemed nervous, glancing over her shoulder before quickly getting into the back seat. "Hi," I said as she settled in. "Where are we headed tonight?" She didn't respond, just pointed at the app on my phone's dashboard mount. Her destination was listed as an address about 15 miles away in a residential neighborhood. I shrugged and pulled back onto the road. Silence isn't uncommon with riders, especially late at night. Some people just want to zone out. But as we drove, the silence grew heavier. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Jenna was staring out the window, her face pale and tense. Her hands clutched the strap of her bag tightly, knuckles white. "You okay back there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just tired." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. I nodded and focused on the road, but something about her tone didn't sit right with me. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights in my mirror. A car was following us, an old, beat-up sedan. It wasn't unusual to see another car on the road, but this one stayed close. Too close. Every turn I made, it followed. Every lane change, it mirrored. I felt my stomach tighten. "Hey, is that car behind us with you?" I asked Jenna. She stiffened, her eyes darting to the mirror. "I don't know," she said quickly, but her tone betrayed her. She knew. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. The sedan's headlights loomed in the mirror, its driver invisible behind the glare. "Do you want me to take a different route?" I offered, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she said sharply. Then softer, "Just get me to the address." I nodded, but my nerves were on edge. The sedan stayed with us for the next 10 minutes, never once attempting to pass. Then, as we neared the residential area, Jenna suddenly leaned forward. "Pull over," she said urgently. "What? Why?" "Just do it." I eased the car onto the shoulder, my heart pounding. Jenna grabbed her bag and opened the door, but before stepping out, she turned to me. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "For what?" "For not asking too many questions." She slammed the door and disappeared into the shadows between 2 houses. I sat there for a moment, stunned, before realizing the sedan had pulled over about 50 feet behind me. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with purpose. My instincts kicked in. I threw the car into drive and sped off, my tires kicking up gravel. In my mirror, I saw the man glance toward the houses where Jenna had vanished before getting back into his car. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I never reported the incident. What would I say? That I picked up a nervous woman who might have been running from someone? That I was followed by a car and didn't stick around to see what happened? For days, I checked the news, half expecting to see a headline about a missing woman or a crime in that neighborhood. But there was nothing. Jenna, or whoever she really was, vanished as completely as she'd appeared. And me? I still drive for the app, but every time I pick someone up late at night, I can't help but check my mirrors. Just in case. It was supposed to be my last ride of the shift. I had been driving for hours, and the thought of finally heading home to collapse into bed was the only thing keeping me going. But then the notification came through. A pickup request from a downtown bar. I almost ignored it, but the fare was decent, and it wasn't far out of my way. I hit accept and turned toward the address. The streets were still lively despite the late hour, neon signs casting colorful reflections on wet pavement. When I pulled up outside the bar, a man in his late 30s stumbled toward the car. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was loosened, and his jacket was draped over one arm. "You all right there?" I asked as he slid into the back seat. He gave a tired nod, slurring slightly. "Just long night." I glanced at the destination on the app, a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes away. "All set." "Yeah, let's go," he mumbled, leaning his head against the window. The ride started off uneventful. He didn't seem interested in talking, and I didn't push. I focused on the road, the rhythmic sound of rain tapping against the windshield lulling my exhaustion. About 10 minutes in, he stirred. "Can you take a different route?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharper. I frowned. "What's wrong with this one?" "Just take a different one," he insisted, his tone more urgent. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was sitting up now, his eyes darting nervously toward the windows. "Okay," I said slowly, turning onto a quieter street. "But you're gonna have to help me out. Where do you want me to go?" "Just avoid Main Street," he muttered. Main Street was the most direct path to his destination, but I decided not to argue. I veered onto a side street, the rain-soaked road eerily empty. For a while, neither of us said anything, but then I noticed his breathing short, shallow, like he was trying to stay calm. "Is someone following you?" I asked, my voice low. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know. Maybe." That was not the answer I wanted to hear. I checked my mirrors. The street behind us was empty. Still, his paranoia was contagious. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. "Look, if something's wrong, you should tell me," I said. He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "Do you believe in coincidences?" "What do you mean?" "There was a guy at the bar," he said. I didn't think much of it at first, but every time I turned around, he was there, by the door, at the bar, even when I went outside to make a call. "Okay, but that's not so weird," I said. "Bars aren't that big." "He wasn't drinking," the man replied. "He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So you think he's following you now?" "I don't know," he said again, but his voice cracked. I glanced at the mirror one more time and froze. Headlights. They had appeared out of nowhere, far behind us but closing fast. The man must have noticed my silence because he turned to look over his shoulder. When he saw the car, he swore under his breath. "That's him," he whispered. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he snapped, panic flooding his voice. I kept driving, trying to stay calm. Okay, maybe it's just someone else going the same way. Let's not jump to conclusions. But the car behind us was gaining, its lights bouncing in the mirror as it sped through puddles. Faster, the man said. I'm not getting into a chase, I replied. If something happens, I'll call the cops. No cops, he snapped, gripping the back of my seat. What? Why not? He didn't answer. Instead, he slumped back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. The other car was right on us now, its headlights glaring through my rear window. It stayed there for a moment, then swerved into the opposite lane as if to pass. I tensed, waiting for it to pull ahead, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed, pacing us side by side. I turned my head briefly and caught a glimpse of the driver. A man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by shadows. What the hell does he want? I muttered. I don't know, the passenger said, his voice trembling. The other car suddenly swerved closer, forcing me toward the curb. I honked, but the driver didn't react. Pull over, the man in the back seat said urgently. I'm not pulling over, I shouted. Then lose him. My heart was racing now. I sped up, taking random turns, trying to shake the car. But no matter where I went, the other driver stayed with us, his car hugging mine like a predator waiting to strike. Finally, I spotted a gas station up ahead, its lights cutting through the rain. Without thinking, I veered into the lot and slammed on the brakes. The other car didn't follow, sped past, disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, my hands trembling on the wheel. You okay? I asked, turning to the man in the back seat. But he was gone. The back seat was empty, the door slightly ajar. I got out of the car, my legs shaky, and looked around. The rain poured down, soaking me instantly. There was no sign of him anywhere. To this day, I don't know who he was, what he was running from, or what that car wanted. Driving a cab has always been my escape. The solitude of the city at night, with its glowing streetlights and near-empty roads, gave me a sense of calm. People think driving a cab is a grind, but for me it was a window into other lives, fragments of stories I'd never fully understand. But one night changed everything, and I haven't been the same since. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind of relentless downpour that soaked the streets and turned the air cold and heavy. I'd already decided it would be my last fare for the night. The rain always made for irritable passengers, and I was tired. I just wanted to head home, dry off, and put my feet up. Then the call came through. A pickup at a gas station just off the highway, one of those places that seemed more like a relic than a functional business. The request was odd, not just for the location but for the time, nearly midnight. I considered ignoring it, but the fare was tempting, and I'd had a slow night. When I arrived, the gas station looked desolate under the buzzing neon lights. The pumps were weathered, and the sign above the building flickered intermittently. I scanned the area, spotting no one at first. Then, near the far pump, a figure emerged from the shadows. The man wore a gray hoodie pulled up over his head, obscuring his face. He was soaked, the fabric clinging to his arms as he stuffed his hands deep into his pockets. He walked toward the cab without hesitation and climbed into the back seat without a word. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. You called for a ride? I asked. He nodded, his face still hidden in the shadow of his hood. Where to? Just drive, he muttered, his voice low and rough. I paused, unsure if I'd heard him right. You need to give me a destination. I can't just... I'll tell you when to turn. Just drive, he snapped, his tone sharp enough to cut through the rain. It wasn't the first time I'd had a passenger who didn't feel like chatting, so I let it slide. I put the car in gear and started down the road, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield. The city quickly gave way to quieter streets, then to the long, winding back roads that led to nowhere in particular. He gave me short, clipped directions, left here, right there, always just in time, as if he didn't want me to know where we were heading until it was too late to question it. The unease set in gradually. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he didn't know where he wanted to go. Or maybe he just liked the rain. But as we left behind the last streetlight, plunging into the inky blackness of the countryside, the atmosphere in the car shifted. "You sure we're going the right way?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just keep driving," he replied, his voice flat. I glanced at him in the mirror again. He was staring out the window, his posture rigid. The hood still hid his face, but I could feel his eyes darting toward me occasionally, watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. The rain intensified, pounding on the roof like a warning. The road ahead was barely visible, illuminated only by my headlights. The silence between us grew heavier with every passing mile. Finally, he spoke again. "Pull over." I hesitated. There was nothing out here but trees and darkness. No houses, no street signs, just an empty stretch of wet road. "Why here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Just pull over." I slowed the car and eased onto the shoulder. The tires crunched against the gravel and I killed the engine. The rain roared louder in the sudden quiet. "Turn off the lights," he said. I froze. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but my body felt paralyzed. "Turn them off," he repeated more forcefully. I reached for the switch with trembling fingers and turned off the headlights. The world outside vanished into blackness. "Now your phone," he said. I swallowed hard. "Listen, if this is a robbery, I don't have much on me, but you can take whatever. Phone, now." I handed it over, my hands shaking. He took it and shoved it into his pocket. Out of the car. I hesitated, my mind racing. If I got out, I'd be exposed, vulnerable. But staying felt just as dangerous. "Get out!" he shouted, raising his voice for the first time. I opened the door slowly and stepped into the rain. It was freezing, the downpour soaking through my clothes instantly. He followed, the knife now visible in his hand. "Move to the front," he said, motioning with the blade. I obeyed, my heart pounding. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I knew better than to make a move. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Shut up," he snapped. Then, in the distance, I heard it, the faint hum of an engine approaching. My heart leapt. The man heard it too. His grip on the knife tightened, and he glanced over his shoulder. The faint glow of headlights appeared around a bend in the road. "Don't say a word," he hissed. But as the car drew closer, I made a split-second decision. "Help!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the night. The approaching car's brakes squealed as it skidded to a stop. The driver's door flew open, and a man stepped out, shining a flashlight toward us. "What's going on here?" the driver demanded. The man in the hoodie froze, his knife wavering. For a moment, I thought he might attack, but then he turned and bolted into the woods. The other driver called the police while I stood there, shaking in the rain. By the time the officers arrived, the man was long gone. They found my phone discarded in the mud and a few footprints leading into the forest, but nothing else. The police took my statement and promised to investigate, but I never heard back. I still drive, but I don't take fares in the middle of nowhere anymore. And on rainy nights, when I see a figure in a hoodie, I can't help but grip the wheel a little tighter, wondering if he's still out there, waiting for another driver to pull over. Late-night shifts driving a taxi always carried a sense of unpredictability, but most nights were uneventful. Just tired workers heading home or a few tipsy bar patrons. That night, though, something felt different from the start. It was a quiet Tuesday, the rain creating a rhythmic patter against my windshield. I had just finished a ride when the app buzzed. The pickup was listed at an unremarkable location, a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind that stayed open more out of habit than demand. When I pulled into the empty parking lot, the passenger was already there, standing under the dim light of the diner's sign. He was tall, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, but his shoes were scuffed and wet, as though he'd been walking through the rain for miles. He carried a single leather briefcase, which he clutched tightly to his chest. He opened the back door and slid in without a word. His presence filled the car, not because of his size but because of his intensity. He didn't look at me, just muttered, "Downtown, the Four Seasons Hotel." "Got it," I replied, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes darted to the diner's entrance, then to the dark road ahead. I tried not to pry, but curiosity got the better of me. "Rough night?" I asked. He didn't respond at first, just stared out the window. Then he said, almost to himself, "They're not far behind." I blinked. "Who's not far behind?" He didn't answer, instead leaning forward to peer out the back window. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the briefcase tighter. Unease prickled the back of my neck. I'd had my share of odd passengers, but this was different. There was something about him, his urgency, his paranoia, that put me on edge. About 10 minutes into the ride, he spoke again. "If anyone follows us, don't stop. Understand?" I glanced at him in the mirror. "What are you talking about? Is someone after you?" He didn't answer directly. "Just drive," he said, his voice low and commanding. I tried to shake off the nerves and focus on the road. The rain made visibility poor, and the deserted streets seemed darker than usual. But I couldn't ignore the growing sense that something was wrong. Then I noticed the headlights. A car appeared behind us, distant at first but gaining steadily. It was an older sedan, its lights glaring through the rain-soaked rear window. The man in the back tensed. "That's them," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Don't slow down." "What do you mean, that's them?" I demanded. "Who's following us?" He finally met my eyes in the mirror, and the intensity in his gaze sent a shiver through me. "You don't want to know. Just keep driving." The car behind us closed the gap, its headlights now blindingly bright. I sped up, the engine protesting as I pushed it harder than I should have on the slick streets. The sedan matched my pace, staying right on our tail. "They're not going to stop," the man muttered, his grip on the briefcase tightening. "They can't let this get out." "Let what get out?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "What's in the briefcase?" He didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The sedan suddenly accelerated, pulling up alongside us. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw two men in the front seats, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. The passenger rolled down his window, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic, a gun. My stomach dropped. "They're armed." "Then don't stop," the man barked. "Whatever happens, keep going." The sedan swerved, trying to force me off the road. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, as I fought to maintain control. The tires skidded on the wet pavement, but I managed to stay on course. The man in the back pulled out a phone and started typing frantically. "There's a warehouse about 5 miles from here," he said. "Turn left at the next intersection." "What's at the warehouse?" I demanded. "Just do it," he snapped. I turned sharply, the car skidding as we veered onto a narrow, poorly lit road. The sedan followed, its tires screeching as it tried to keep up. My heart pounded as adrenaline coursed through me. We reached the warehouse, an imposing structure with rusted metal siding and broken windows. The man threw open the door and jumped out, motioning for me to follow. "Inside now." "I'm not going in there," I yelled. "This isn't my fight." He hesitated, then tossed a wad of cash onto the passenger seat. "Consider this your tip. Now drive, and don't look back." Before I could protest, he sprinted toward the warehouse, disappearing into the shadows. The sedan pulled up moments later, its occupants jumping out and chasing after him. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I floored the gas and sped away, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. The events of the night played over and over in my mind. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd been caught in the middle of something I didn't understand? The next morning, I checked the news. There was nothing about a chase, a warehouse, or any violent incidents in the area. It was like it had never happened. But later that week, I found something tucked under the back seat of my car. A small USB drive. I don't know how it got there, and I haven't worked up the courage to plug it in. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm being watched. If the headlights I see in my mirror are just random cars or something more. I haven't picked up a late-night passenger since, and I never will. Driving a taxi means encountering all kinds of people. Some are talkative, others silent. Some radiate warmth, while others carry a chill that clings to the air long after they've left the car. This story is about one of the latter, a fare I'll never forget. It was late, past midnight, and business had slowed to a crawl. The rain hadn't let up all evening, making the streets glisten under the dim glow of streetlights. I'd been debating whether to call it a night when a hail came in from the outskirts of town, near an old industrial area. Not the safest place, but fares were scarce, and I needed the money. When I arrived, the place was exactly as I'd imagined. Empty warehouses, cracked pavement, and not a soul in sight. For a moment, I thought the request was a no-show, but then I saw him. The man stepped out from the shadows, his figure blurred by the rain. He wore a suit, unusual for that part of town, and carried a briefcase. As he approached the car, he moved with purpose, his polished shoes splashing through puddles. He opened the back door and got in without hesitation, setting the briefcase on the seat beside him. "Where to?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Downtown," he replied curtly, his voice calm but firm. "The corner of 5th and Main." It wasn't far, 15 minutes at most, but something about him immediately put me on edge. Maybe it was the fact that his suit looked expensive, far out of place in the rundown area. Or maybe it was his demeanor, too composed for someone caught in a torrential downpour. As we drove, the man didn't say much, which wasn't unusual. Plenty of passengers preferred silence, but this silence felt different. It was heavy, almost suffocating. I glanced at him in the mirror. He was staring out the window, his face obscured by the dim light, but I noticed his hands. They were perfectly still, resting on his lap, almost too still, like he was rehearsing calm. The first few minutes passed uneventfully, but as we neared downtown, he leaned forward slightly. "Can you take a different route?" he asked. The request caught me off guard. Sure. Any reason?" "Just avoid Main Street. Take 2nd Avenue instead." It wasn't entirely out of the way, but the detour added a couple of extra minutes. I nodded, changing lanes. Maybe he wanted to avoid traffic or construction, I thought. As we passed through quieter streets, I noticed him fidgeting for the first time. His fingers drummed lightly on the briefcase, his gaze darting to the rear window. He wasn't watching the road. He was watching behind us. My instincts started to scream. Something was off. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," he replied, his tone clipped. "Just keep driving." The rain continued to pound, the sound of the windshield wipers filling the car. When we reached 2nd Avenue, the street was nearly empty. He shifted in his seat, leaning closer to the window, and then I saw it. A dark SUV in my rearview mirror. It hadn't been there before, and it was keeping pace with us. "You want me to speed up?" I asked, half joking, trying to lighten the mood. "Stay steady," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. I kept my eyes on the road, but my pulse quickened. The SUV stayed with us, maintaining a steady distance. "Are you being followed?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. The man didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Just keep driving. Don't stop until I tell you." At that moment, I regretted taking the fare. My gut told me to pull over and kick him out, but my curiosity, or maybe stupidity, kept me going. The SUV suddenly sped up, pulling alongside us for a brief moment before falling back again. It wasn't an accident. Whoever was in that car was watching us. "What's in the briefcase?" I asked, my voice tight. "Nothing you need to worry about," he snapped, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. Panic took over, and I floored it, swerving around the SUV. The tires screeched as we sped down the street. In the mirror, I saw the two men scrambling back into their vehicle. "They'll catch up," I said, my hands trembling on the wheel. "They won't," he replied, though he didn't sound convinced. We weaved through side streets, the SUV close behind. The man gave me directions, guiding me through a maze of alleys and back roads I didn't even know existed. Finally, we reached a small parking garage. "Pull in here," he ordered. I did as he said, driving up to the second level before coming to a stop. The SUV didn't follow. The man grabbed his briefcase and opened the door. "Wait," I called after him. "What the hell was that?" He paused, looking back at me with an expression that was hard to read. Part gratitude, part regret. "You're a good driver," he said. "Forget this happened." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the garage. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the wheel, my heart racing. The next day, I scoured the news for any mention of a chase or a crime involving a black SUV or a man with a briefcase. There was nothing. But every time I pick up a fare now, I think of him. The man in the suit, the mysterious briefcase, and the chase through the rain-soaked streets. And I wonder, was I just a driver that night, or did I help someone escape something far worse?